It was just another Monday morning in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. The skyscrapers glistened under the southern sun, and the streets around Benton Global Logistics pulsed with life heels clicking against pavement, briefcases swinging, coffee cups clutched like lifelines. Inside the company's grand marble lobby, employees rushed through the turnstiles, scanning badges without a second glance at the staff who made the place shine each night. Among them was Mariah Johnson, her burgundy janitor's uniform blended into the background, just as it had for the past 13 years. She pushed her mop steadily across the polished floor, quiet and invisible, her eyes on the tiles. People passed her every day, executives, interns, middle managers, yet few ever bothered to learn her name. To most, she was simply the cleaning lady. But that morning, something unusual happened. As Richard Coleman, Benton Global's CEO, strode through the lobby on his way to the 25th floor executive suite, he was caught off guard by a sound. A voice, fluid, sharp, musical, rolled across the lobby. He froze. It wasn't the language itself, though it tugged at his memory of a business trip to Shanghai. It was Mandarin, and it was being spoken with flawless precision. Richard scanned the space, expecting to see one of his international sales reps. Instead, his gaze landed on Mariah, the woman with a mop, her hair pulled back in neat braids, standing near the lobby's touchscreen directory. She wasn't cleaning anymore. She was helping. In front of her, an older Chinese gentleman in a navy windbreaker looked lost, clutching a piece of paper with an address scrawled across it. Mariah spoke to him in calm, MEASURED Mandarin, pointing toward the elevator bank with a reassuring smile. Relief washed over the man's face as he bowed slightly in gratitude. Richard blinked. Did he hear that right? Was his janitor speaking Mandarin? He slowed his pace, curiosity pulling him closer. Just as Mariah wrapped up with the visitor, a delivery driver shuffled in with boxes stacked on a cart. He looked confused, reading paperwork with poorly translated instructions. Without missing a beat, Mariah turned, her voice shifting seamlessly into Spanish. She clarified where the packages needed to go, her tone friendly but firm. The driver's eyes widened in surprise. "Gracias," he muttered, wheeling his cart away. Richard's jaw tightened. To languages? Before he could even process it, a vendor wandered in, staring at a set of mislabeled conference materials. Mariah glanced at the boxes, then spoke in French, pointing out the mistake with the ease of a Parisian concierge. The vendor chuckled, nodding gratefully as he corrected the labels. 3 languages, 3 flawless transitions, all in less than 2 minutes. Richard's chest tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier, a pinch of guilt. For decades, he had built Benton Global into a logistics powerhouse, priding himself on international expansion, investing millions in translators and cultural training. And here, in his own building, the most linguistically gifted person he'd encountered in years had been mopping floors 2 stories below his office. He took a slow step forward, unable to ignore it any longer. "Excuse me," he said. Mariah turned, startled. Her eyes flickered with caution, the reflex of someone long accustomed to being overlooked. She straightened, clutching the mop handle like a shield. "Yes, sir." Richard managed a faint smile. "That was Mandarin, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir." "You speak it fluently?" "Yes." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "And Spanish, French?" Mariah nodded. "Yes, those 2. Richard tilted his head, curiosity now bordering on disbelief. "How many languages do you speak, exactly?" For a moment, she hesitated. Then, in the same steady tone, she answered, "Mandarin, Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili, and I read Latin, though I don't really count that." Richard blinked. 9? "Yes, sir." There was no pride in her voice, no arrogance, just plain truth, delivered as casually as if she had been listing cleaning supplies. Richard's mind spun. 9 languages, from a woman who had quietly scrubbed toilets, emptied trash cans, and polished windows in his building for over a decade. A woman he had passed countless times without a second thought. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Mariah Johnson." "Well, Ms. Johnson, are you free for a few minutes?" Her brow furrowed. "Now?" "Yes, I'd like to talk with you in my office." Mariah hesitated, her grip on the mop tightening. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but wary, like someone who had learned that unexpected attention from authority rarely worked in her favor. After a pause, she nodded. "All right." Richard gestured toward the elevator and held the door as she stepped inside. The ride upward was quiet, the kind of silence heavy with unspoken questions. Halfway up, Mariah broke it. "I've worked here 13 years, she said softly. Her reflection in the mirrored wall stared back at her, eyes calm but distant. "Never thought I'd be invited upstairs." Richard glanced at her. A small, thoughtful smile tugged at his lips. "You might be surprised how quickly things can change." Neither of them realized, in that moment, just how much was about to change, not just for Mariah, not just for Richard, but for everyone. In that building, the elevator dinged, doors sliding open onto the plush executive hallway. The air smelled faintly of citrus polish and leather. Money, if you had to name the scent. Mariah stepped out, her shoes soft against the carpet. Secretaries glanced up, eyes widening at the sight of the janitor walking beside the CEO. Whispers rippled in her wake. For the first time in years, Mariah wasn't invisible. And that, she would soon learn, was both a blessing and a challenge. The executive floor of Benton Global felt like another world. The walls gleamed with polished wood, the air perfumed with leather and citrus, a stark contrast to the chemical tang of bleach and ammonia Mariah was used to. As she followed Richard Coleman down the hall, her steps slowed, eyes lifted from computer screens. Assistants whispered to each other. A janitor in a burgundy uniform walking beside the CEO. It was a scene that didn't belong, and everyone knew it. Richard didn't explain. He simply nodded at his assistant, who opened the frosted glass doors to his corner office. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a glow on the skyline of Atlanta. Behind a massive desk sat a wall-sized map of the world, dotted with colored pins marking Benton's far-flung operations. Richard gestured toward a chair. "Please have a seat." Mariah lowered herself carefully, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't glance around the way most people did when stepping into the CEO's office. For the first time, she just sat quietly, watching him, her expression unreadable. Richard leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "I'll be honest, Ms. Johnson. I didn't expect to have this conversation today, but what I saw downstairs." He shook his head, still trying to process it. 9 languages? How does someone with that kind of talent end up cleaning floors here? For a moment, Mariah didn't answer. Her eyes drifted toward the glass window where the city stretched endlessly. Then she turned back, her voice steady. "You got time?" "For the truth," Richard raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." She took a slow breath, rubbing her palms together as though warming up the words. "I was born in Detroit, only child. My dad fixed cars. My mom was a nurse's aide. We didn't have much, but they pushed education like it was gospel. They used to tell me knowledge is the one thing they can't take away from you." Her eyes softened as she spoke, memories flickering like old film reels. "I earned a scholarship to the University of Michigan, majored in linguistics. I loved the puzzle of words, how language builds bridges. I was halfway through a master's degree when life fell apart. My mom got sick, cancer. I came home to take care of her. 6 months later, my dad had a stroke. He didn't make it." Her voice didn't crack, but the weight of it pressed into the room. Richard's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Mariah gave a small nod and continued. "Bills piled up. My scholarship couldn't stretch that far once I left campus. I had a baby not long after. The father wasn't around, so I worked grocery stores, nursing homes, temp jobs, whatever kept the lights on. Eventually, a supervisor here offered me night custodial hours. The schedule fit. I could pick my daughter up from school, pay rent, keep food on the table. That's how I ended up here." Richard listened, unblinking, as her story unfolded. There was no self-pity in her tone, no dramatics, just fact. "But the languages," she went on. "I never stopped. I borrowed textbooks from libraries, bought old cassette tapes of language courses, read newspapers in 5 different tongues. Sometimes I'd stay up all night just to keep sharp. It was the only thing that still felt like mine. She paused, her gaze dropping to the polished floor. Most people never asked. They saw the uniform and assumed. That's all. That word assumed hung between them like smoke. Richard leaned back, the leather chair creaking. He thought about all the board meetings where executives spoke of diversity and global talent, like they were items on a checklist. And yet, here was Mariah, proof that brilliance often lived in plain sight, overlooked because of the color of her skin, the badge on her chest, the job she did. You ever think about doing something else? He asked softly. Mariah gave a half shrug. Sometimes. But it's hard to dream when rent's due. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, alive, full of unspoken truths. Richard reached for his notebook, jotting something down quickly. Mariah tilted her head. What are you writing? Ideas, he said simply. She studied him for a moment, then looked away. It was hard for her to believe. She had seen enough people in power talk big and deliver little. Promises were easy, action was rare. The conversation stayed with Richard long after she left his office, through budget reviews, vendor calls, and emails. He kept circling back to the woman in the janitor's uniform who spoke 9 languages and carried herself with quiet resilience. By late afternoon, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He left the executive floor and took the elevator down, not to the lobby this time, but to the basement service level. Down there, the air was warmer. The walls bore scuff marks from carts and boots. Break rooms smelled faintly of microwaved noodles. He passed by stacks of bottled water, racks of cleaning supplies, and finally reached the janitorial supply room. Through the open door, he saw Mariah restocking microfiber cloths on a shelf. She looked up, surprised to see him. You came down here? She asked. Richard smiled faintly. Couldn't stop thinking about our talk. He hesitated, then added, I have a favor to ask. Mariah set the cloths aside, her brow knitting. What kind of favor? There's a meeting upstairs. A delegation from Sao Paulo came early, and our translator canceled last minute. Could you help? She blinked. Portuguese, yes. Mariah studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. I can do that. Within minutes, they were walking together toward conference room for C, neither of them realizing that the small request would spark a transformation. No one in the company could have predicted. Conference room for C was already buzzing with tension when Richard and Mariah arrived. 4 executives from Sao Paulo sat stiffly round the polished oak table, their suits sharp, their eyes restless as they scrolled on their phones. The absence of a translator had left the atmosphere awkward, each minute stretching longer than the last. Richard held the door for Mariah. The moment she stepped inside, the executives looked up, confusion flashing across their faces. To them, she looked like the building staff for burgundy uniform, her plain sneakers, the faint scent of cleaning solution that clung no matter how hard she scrubbed. But then she spoke. Bom dia, senhores, she said warmly, her Portuguese rolling out smooth as silk. Peco desculpas pelo atraso. Eu vou ajudar como reunião. Good morning, gentlemen. Sorry for the delay. I'll be assisting with the meeting. The shift in the room was immediate. The executives straightened, shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. One of them smiled, grateful to finally hear his own language. Richard stepped back, watching in silence. He didn't understand a word of Portuguese, but he understood the transformation in the air. Mariah moved with quiet confidence, translating seamlessly as Richard welcomed the delegation. When one of the Brazilians cracked a joke about Atlanta traffic, Mariah not only translated the words, but delivered them with the same playful intonation. The entire table chuckled together, bridging the cultural gap that moments earlier had felt like a wall. Richard glanced at the American staff sitting nearby. Their eyes darted between him and Mariah, disbelief etched across their faces. No one had expected this, not from a janitor, not from someone who had been invisible just yesterday. For 20 minutes, Mariah orchestrated the flow of conversation. She shifted between languages like flipping switches, ensuring nothing was lost in translation. When the discussion turned to logistics contracts, she clarified complex terms without hesitation. When the visitors expressed concerns about shipping delays, She softened their frustration with a calm, empathetic tone. By the end, the Brazilians leaned back in their chairs, satisfied. One of them, a senior director with silver hair, turned to Richard and spoke in accented English. "She's better than anyone we've worked with this year." "Where did you find her?" Richard smiled faintly, glancing at Mariah, who was already stacking empty coffee cups onto a tray. "Right here," he said. The meeting adjourned with handshakes and laughter. As the executives filed out, one of them clasped Mariah's hand in gratitude. She responded with a polite smile, but her eyes flickered with unease. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, not from boardrooms, not from men in suits who usually walked past her without a second glance. In the hallway, Richard caught up with her. "You ever do professional translation before?" Mariah shook her head. "Not really. I've helped people out at hospitals, government offices, things like that. But no certificates, no training. My daughter needed me more than any class." Richard studied her closely. "And where is she now?" A hint of pride softened Mariah's face. "She's 26, a nurse in Tempe, Arizona. Paid for her own schooling, stubborn like her mama." For a fleeting moment, the two of them weren't CEO and janitor. They were just parents talking about their children with quiet pride. They returned to the service level together. Mariah clocked back in, glancing at the schedule board. She still had 2 more floors to clean before shift change. Before she picked up her supplies, she turned to Richard. "I didn't do anything special today." Richard raised his eyebrows. "That's not how it looked to me." She gave a faint smile, then walked off, mop bucket rattling behind her. That night, Richard sat in his car long after the parking garage had emptied. The city lights glittered beyond the windshield, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the endless meetings where Benton Global discussed talent pipelines and diversity initiatives, the millions spent recruiting from overseas, hunting for brilliance in far-off cities. All this time, they had been looking outward, and yet the gold had been right there, in his own building, pushing a mop, ignored by everyone including him. The real question gnawed at him, now that he knew. What was he going to do about it? The next morning, whispers spread through the building. Like wildfire, a janitor had translated at an executive meeting. A Brazilian director had praised her. Some employees shook their heads in disbelief. Others dismissed it as a rumor. But when Mariah's supervisor tapped her on the shoulder during her shift and said, "The CEO wants to see you again," the rumor became reality. Mariah froze. "Did I do something wrong?" The supervisor shrugged. He didn't say, just told me to send you up. Double quotes. Mariah wiped her hands on a towel and made the same walk as the day before. This time, though, things felt different. People looked up when she passed. Some whispered. A receptionist even smiled politely, as if she knew something Mariah didn't. When she entered the executive suite, Richard stood by the window, sipping black coffee, gazing out at the skyline. "Come in," he said, not turning immediately. Mariah stepped forward, her shoes sinking into the thick carpet. She stood quietly until he finally faced her. "I've been thinking," he began, "about talent waste, about how many people never get a shot, not because they're not good enough, but because no one looks twice." Mariah didn't respond. She didn't trust easy praise. She had seen too many people talk big and do nothing. "I want to create a new position," Richard continued. "Something that doesn't exist yet. A cultural liaison. Someone who understands languages, cultures, and people." Mariah blinked, stunned. "Is this real?" "As real as it gets," Richard said. "You may not have a degree, but you have something better. You've lived it. You've proved it, and I need you." For a long moment, silence filled the office. Mariah's eyes glistened, though she blinked away the tears before they could fall. "All right then," she said finally, her voice firm. "Let's see what I can do." Richard extended his hand. She took it. It wasn't just a handshake. It was a promise, a turning point. What neither of them knew was that the promise would stir not just admiration, but envy, resentment, and a storm of questions that would test Mariah harder than anything she'd faced before. By Monday morning, the whispers had grown into full-blown chatter. Benton Global's headquarters, usually abuzz with talk of shipments, contracts, and quarterly reports, had a new subject: Mariah Johnson. The janitor who once pushed a mop bucket down the hallways was now seated in meetings with international clients, her new title cultural liaison. International had been emailed out in the weekly staff memo. Some congratulated her quietly. Others raised eyebrows. A few muttered outright disbelief. In the staff lounge, two marketing assistants leaned close over their salads. "I've been here 2 years with a master's degree," one whispered, "still waiting for a promotion." "And she just skips the line." Her friend shrugged. "Maybe. She knows something we don't." "Please," the first scoffed. "She was scrubbing toilets last week. How is she qualified to sit in on board meetings?" The bitterness wasn't hidden. It was loud enough for Mariah to hear when she walked past the lounge door later that afternoon. She didn't slow her pace, didn't flinch, but the words clung to her like dust. When she arrived at her new office, a small space carved out of the International Operations Wing, her nameplate was already mounted outside the door. Mariah Johnson, Cultural Liaison, black letters on brushed steel. She stood there a long moment before stepping inside. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint. On the desk sat a neat stack of files, a laptop, and a handwritten note from Richard. "Your work matters." R.C. Mariah placed her old janitor's badge in the top drawer. Not to forget, to remember exactly what it had taken to get here. Her first test came quickly. Victor Harris, the head of International Operations, strode into her office without knocking. He was tall, with neatly combed gray hair and the clipped tone of a man used to being obeyed. He didn't shake her hand, didn't even sit down. "So, you're the new liaison," he said. His words coated in politeness sharp enough to cut. Mariah looked up calmly. "That's what I'm told. You have experience in corporate environments." She smiled faintly, only from the outside looking in. Victor didn't laugh. He dropped a thick folder onto her desk. "These are reports from Italy, contracts from our Dubai partners, and an executive summary of our stalled Morocco expansion. If you're going to be in this position, you'll need to keep up." He left without waiting for her response. Mariah stared at the folder. Her stomach tightened, but not with fear, with determination. She opened it, flipping through pages of dense legal text and half-translated agreements. Most people would drown in the jargon. Mariah didn't. She took a pen, circling mistranslations, scribbling notes in the margins in English, Italian, and Arabic. Hours passed. By the time the office lights dimmed, she had corrected errors that had cost the company thousands in delays. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes, but a quiet pride pulsed in her chest. Still, the resistance was everywhere. At meetings, some managers ignored her suggestions, only to repeat them later as their own. Others questioned her credentials openly. One even joked, "So do we pay you in mop buckets or translation fees?" The laughter that followed stung, though she didn't show it. Mariah's instinct was to stay silent, to keep her head down, but she knew this was different now. Silence would only confirm their doubts. So she spoke up, calm, firm, precise, correcting misinterpretations, offering insights about cultural nuance that no software could replicate. Slowly, grudgingly, people began to listen. One afternoon, Richard called her into his office. He was standing by the training room, where a maintenance worker was replacing the plaque outside the door. The new sign gleamed, "The Johnson Room." Mariah blinked, startled. "You named it after me?" "No party, no announcement," Richard said quietly. "But every new hire who walks through this door will see your name. They'll know talent can come from anywhere." Mariah's throat tightened. She didn't cry, she didn't need to. The gesture spoke louder than flowers or speeches ever could. But the honor also painted a bigger target on her back. By Thursday, the resistance took shape in a sharper form. She was summoned to a meeting not by Richard, but by Eleanor Briggs, a senior board member flown in from Dallas. Eleanor was a sharp-featured woman in her 60s, known for her bluntness. Mariah entered the conference room. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, hands folded neatly. Double quotes, "Ms. Johnson," she began, her voice smooth but cold. "Help me understand how someone with your background is now handling high-level international affairs. You were a janitor here 3 weeks ago." "Correct." Mariah met her gaze, unflinching. "That's correct. And you expect us to believe you're qualified?" Mariah didn't hesitate. "I speak 9 languages. I understand cultures because I've lived them. In the last 2 weeks, I corrected to vendor contracts, reopened negotiations in Morocco, and secured a verbal agreement with our Brazilian partners. Those deals are saving this company time and money. For a moment, silence filled the room. Eleanor pursed her lips, clearly displeased with the answer but unable to refute it. You think that's enough to make you a leader? She pressed. Mariah's tone stayed calm. I think leadership is about solving problems. That's what I've been doing. When the meeting ended, Mariah stepped outside, her pulse finally quickening. She walked out of the glass tower, sat on a bench across the street, and stared up at the building where she had once been invisible. Now, everyone saw her, and not all of them liked it. Her phone buzzed. She answered. Hey, Ma, her daughter's voice chimed on the other end. Everything okay? Mariah hesitated, then smiled faintly. Yeah, baby. I just needed to hear your voice. You sure? I'm sure. She hung up, exhaling slowly. Inside the tower, resistance was mounting, but so was support. That very afternoon, a note appeared on the whiteboard outside her office in careful handwriting. We see you. No name. Just 3 words, but to Mariah, they meant the world. The note on the whiteboard lingered in Mariah's mind for days. We see you. 3 small words, but for someone who had spent most of her life unseen, they felt enormous. Something began to shift. People started knocking on her office door, not just executives who needed translations, but interns, assistants, even mid-level managers. They came with nervous smiles and folders clutched in their hands. Do you have a minute? They'd ask. Mariah always said yes. At first, they wanted small favors, help phrasing an email to an overseas partner, guidance on how to avoid cultural missteps before a big pitch. But soon, the visits turned into something deeper. One intern confessed, I get so nervous before presentations. My voice shakes. Mariah leaned forward, her tone gentle. Then practice until the words feel like breathing. And remember, half the people in that room are more scared than you are. Speak to the ones who listen, not the ones who judge, another young analyst whispered. I'm the only Latina in my department. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong. Mariah met her eyes. Listen to me. You belong. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The shame isn't in being different. The shame is in pretending talent has only one color, one face, one background. Words spread quietly. If you wanted honest advice, if you needed courage before a presentation, you went to Mariah Johnson. She never lectured. She just listened, then shared wisdom forged in years of being underestimated. Meanwhile, her impact on Benton Global's bottom line grew undeniable. In one meeting with a Moroccan delegation, negotiations had stalled for months over a single phrase in a contract. The company's software translations had mangled it beyond recognition. Mariah scanned the document, smiled, and corrected it on the spot. The deal was signed that afternoon. In another instance, she caught a cultural misstep in a marketing campaign. Headed for Dubai, a slogan that seemed harmless in English translated into something deeply offensive in Arabic. Her quick intervention saved the company from a PR disaster. Each time, she didn't boast. She didn't seek credit. She just did the work, quietly, efficiently, with a steadiness that made people stop underestimating her. One evening, Richard stopped by her office. The hallway was nearly empty, most staff already gone for the day. He leaned against her doorway, arms folded. You know, he said, I've been watching the traffic outside your office. Feels like you're running a mentorship program without even trying. Mariah chuckled softly. People just want someone to listen, that's all. Richard's expression grew thoughtful. I've been thinking about something. What if we made that official? A program to find more talent like you. People in non-executive roles who have skills we're blind to. Mariah looked up sharply. You really think the board would go for that? Not all of them, Richard admitted. But I don't care. This company has been wasting brilliance for too long. We've been so focused on recruiting from the outside, we've ignored the diamonds already here. Mariah leaned back in her chair, considering. Slowly, she nodded. There are more like me. People who never got the chance. You give them one. You'll be surprised what they can do. So you'll help me build it. A small smile tugged at her lips. already started in my head. By the end of the month, Benton Global quietly launched a pilot initiative called Voices Within. It wasn't flashy, no corporate video, no staged photos. Just an open invitation to staff at every level from mailroom clerks to cafeteria workers to submit their skills, passions, or experiences that went beyond their job titles. The response stunned everyone. A security guard revealed he was fluent in Russian and had once served as a translator for the U.S. Army. A receptionist shared her background in data analytics and uncovered inefficiencies in scheduling that saved thousands of dollars. A cafeteria cook, originally from Ghana, offered insights on African trade networks that impressed the logistics team. For the first time, employees who had blended into the background were stepping forward, their talents finally acknowledged. And at the center of it all was Mariah, quietly cheering them on. One moment in particular stayed with her. After giving a talk to a group of interns, a young man approached her, eyes glistening. "My mom's a housekeeper," he said softly. "She speaks 5 languages. I used to be embarrassed to tell people that, but seeing you here, I'm proud now." Mariah touched his arm gently. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. The only thing to be ashamed of is staying blind to brilliance." The words echoed in the room long after he left. Yet with the rising recognition came sharper backlash. Some employees embraced the new program. Others muttered about favoritism, about how the company was lowering standards. Anonymous comments circulated on internal forums. "She's just a janitor playing dress up. This isn't about talent, it's about optics." Next thing you know, the mailroom guy will be running finance. Mariah read them late at night, alone in her apartment. For a moment, doubt pressed heavy on her chest. But then she remembered the intern's hopeful eyes, the note on her whiteboard, her daughter's pride. She closed the laptop, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "Keep going." At the next all-staff meeting, Richard addressed the initiative. Mariah sat quietly in the second row, not knowing he planned to mention her. "Voices Within isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's strategy. If you ignore the talent right under your nose, you deserve to fall behind. And if you ever doubt someone because of their uniform or job title, ask yourself, what brilliance might you be missing?" The room fell silent. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Soon, the applause filled the hall. Mariah didn't stand. She didn't wave. She just sat there, her throat tight, knowing that for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. But deep down, she also knew not every door stays open without a fight. And somewhere in the building, people were already planning to push back harder. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after the Voices Within program launched, Mariah was summoned again, not by Richard this time, but by the board itself. An email landed in her inbox with a simple line, "Meeting with the executive committee." To PM conference room A. Mariah stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. This wasn't a casual conversation. It was a trial. The room was intimidating. By design, a long mahogany table stretched across the space, surrounded by leather chairs occupied by some of the most powerful figures in the company. At the head sat Eleanor Briggs, the same board member who had grilled her weeks earlier. Her eyes, sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses, tracked Mariah the way a hawk tracks a sparrow. "Ms. Johnson," Eleanor began, her tone clipped, "thank you for joining us. Please sit." Mariah lowered herself into the chair, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't fidget. She'd learned long ago that stillness could be its own kind of strength. Eleanor leaned forward. "Help us understand how a woman who was a janitor in this building 3 weeks ago is now responsible for high-level international affairs." A murmur rippled through the table. Some board members nodded, others avoided eye contact. Mariah met Eleanor's gaze without flinching. "Because I speak 9 languages," she said evenly. "Because I understand cultures not from textbooks, but from living them. In the past 3 weeks, I've corrected mistranslations that cost us thousands, reopened negotiations in Morocco, and secured a verbal agreement with our Brazilian partners. Those deals are being finalized as we speak." One board member, a man with a clipped British accent, frowned. "That may be true, but do you have leadership experience? corporate leadership. Specifically, Mariah's voice stayed calm. Leadership isn't about titles, it's about solving problems. And that's what I've been doing every day since you gave me the chance. The room went quiet. Richard, seated a few chairs down, finally spoke. His tone was calm but firm. With respect, Eleanor, this isn't about where Ms. Johnson started. It's about where she is now and what she's accomplished in record time. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Accomplishments can be exaggerated. Mariah leaned forward slightly, her voice sharpening. Not these. The Moroccan deal had been stalled for months because of one phrase no one bothered to check. I corrected it in 10 minutes. The Brazil partnership. I brokered that conversation myself when our hired translator failed to show. And the Dubai campaign? I caught a cultural error that would have embarrassed this company on a global stage. Her words landed heavy. Even Eleanor blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the precision. After the meeting adjourned, Mariah stepped out into the hallway. Her knees felt weaker now than they had inside. But she kept her head high. Richard caught up to her. You handled that better than most executives I know, he said. Mariah allowed herself a small smile. I didn't have a choice. Richard's expression softened. Neither did they. They'll have to face the truth sooner or later. You've earned this. Still, outside the glass walls of power, the backlash didn't disappear. Anonymous posts on the company's internal forum grew sharper. She's a diversity hire, nothing more. If speaking languages is all it takes, my Uber driver should be VP. What's next? Custodians running the board. Mariah read them late at night. The glow of her laptop harsh in her dim apartment. The sting was real, but so was the resolve. She whispered to herself the same words her parents once told her. Knowledge is the one thing they can't take away from you. The next morning, as if to balance the scales, she found another note outside her office, this time written in blue marker on the whiteboard. Keep going. We're with you. No signature, just quiet solidarity. And then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, Mariah was asked to join a call with partners from Casablanca. The expansion into North Africa had been frozen for months over mistrust and cultural missteps. As the video call began, the executives on the other end spoke quickly in Arabic, frustration clear in their tone. Most of Benton's staff in the room looked lost, but Mariah leaned in, replying smoothly in Arabic, her voice calm, her phrasing respectful. Slowly, the tension eased. She addressed each concern with care, weaving in cultural nuances that showed she understood their perspective. By the end of the call, the Moroccans nodded. We are ready to proceed, their leader said. The room in Atlanta erupted into quiet applause. Contracts that had gathered dust for months were finally moving forward, all because Mariah spoke their language, not just with her tongue, but with her heart. Richard glanced at the faces around the table. For once, no one could argue. Results were undeniable. That evening, as she left the building, a young employee rushed up to her. He was barely out of college, his tie crooked, his eyes nervous. My mom's a janitor, he blurted. She speaks 4 languages. I used to hide that from people, like it was something to be ashamed of. But as seeing you here, Ms. Johnson, now I'm proud. Mariah placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. The only shame is staying blind to brilliance. The young man's eyes welled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. By the end of the week, Mariah returned to her office to find her whiteboard filled with messages. Thank you for giving us hope. Representation matters. Finally, someone who understands us. She stood there, throat tight, staring at the words. For so long she had been invisible. Now, her presence was not only seen, it was a beacon. But she also knew, the higher she climbed, the stronger the pushback would become. And in the shadows of the boardroom, plans were already forming. Not everyone wanted a former janitor-let alone a black woman to change the narrative of Benton Global. By mid-month, voices within had grown beyond what anyone expected. What began as a quiet experiment quickly turned into a movement inside Benton Global. Employees from every floor, every department, even those who had once felt invisible, were stepping forward. And Mariah was at the center of it all. She didn't ask to be a mentor. But her door never stayed closed. Interns stopped by before presentations, cafeteria workers sought advice about career paths, and security guards dropped in to share skills long hidden. Her office, small and plain, became a place of courage. One afternoon, a receptionist named Lynn Tran came in, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder. "I heard you help people," Lynn said softly, her Vietnamese accent curling through her words. Mariah gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." "Tell me." Lynn opened the folder, showing spreadsheets and charts. "I studied data analytics back home, but here they only see me as the girl who answers phones. I don't know how to show them what I can really do." Mariah leaned forward, eyes kind but steady. "You just did. The first step is believing your work matters. The second is making sure the right people see it. Leave these with me. I'll find a way to put them in front of the right eyes." For the first time, Lynn smiled. Stories like that multiplied. A cafeteria worker revealed his knowledge of supply chain routes in West Africa, stunning the logistics team. A male clerk turned out to be fluent in Russian, offering insights into Eastern markets. Even a night security guard showed interest in corporate compliance, bringing ideas that impressed auditors. Each time, Mariah listened, encouraged, and connected them with someone who could use their skills. Slowly, the company culture began to shift. People no longer looked at janitors, receptionists, or cafeteria staff with the same dismissive glance. Curiosity replaced assumption. But the change also fueled resentment. Some managers muttered in hallways, "This place is turning into a charity project." Others complained during coffee breaks, "What's next? The guy who fixes the copy machine running legal?" Mariah heard the whispers. She ignored most of them, but some cut deeper than she cared to admit. Late at night, sitting alone in her apartment, she sometimes wondered if she had stirred up a storm too big to survive. And yet every morning, when she walked into the building and saw the quiet nods of gratitude from those once invisible, she knew she couldn't stop. Richard Coleman noticed it. One evening, he invited Mariah into his office. The city skyline glowed outside the windows. Atlanta bathed in golden dusk. Richard set aside his papers and looked at her. "You've started something bigger than you realize," he said. Mariah folded her hands, cautious. "I'm just trying to help people be seen." "That's exactly it," Richard said. "For years, we've measured talent by degrees, titles, resumes. But you're proving something different. That brilliance doesn't always wear a suit or carry a diploma. It can come from anyone, anywhere." He leaned back, thoughtful. "I want to take voices within company-wide training, mentorship, pathways for advancement. I want you to help design it." Mariah hesitated. "Richard, people already think I don't belong here. You really think they'll let me build a program like that?" Richard gave her a steady look. "Let them talk. Results speak louder. And you've delivered results no one else could." That night, Mariah walked out of the building with a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope for the people who might finally get their shot. Fear of the backlash she knew would follow. Her phone buzzed. It was her daughter. "Ma, you sound tired," her daughter said. Mariah smiled faintly. "Just a long day. You're changing things, aren't you? I see the articles online. People are talking about you." Mariah's chest tightened. "Maybe. But it's not about me. It's about what comes after." There was a pause on the line. Then her daughter said softly, "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, carried her through the night. The next week, Mariah stood in front of a group of new interns in the training room, now officially renamed the Johnson Room. The plaque on the wall gleamed, her name engraved in black letters. She didn't boast. She didn't even mention it. She simply told her story. "I used to clean these floors at night while everyone else went home," she said. "And for a long time, nobody noticed me. But what I learned is this: your worth isn't defined by the job title on your badge. It's defined by what you bring to the table and by whether you keep going even when nobody sees you." Silence followed. Then applause. One intern approached afterward, tears in his eyes. "My father's a janitor," he said. "He speaks 4 languages, but nobody at his job cares. Seeing you here, I finally believe it matters." Mariah placed a hand on his shoulder. Tell him it does. And never hide where you come from. The only shame is staying blind to brilliance. Back upstairs. However, not everyone was clapping in a closed-door meeting. Eleanor Briggs whispered to a fellow board member, "This is getting out of hand." One janitor inspiring the staff is one thing. Restructuring the company around her ideas, that's another. The boardroom shadows were deepening, and Mariah had no idea that the fight ahead would test her more than any language ever could. The backlash came to a head on a gray Thursday morning. Mariah was called once again into conference room at the same long table, the same sharp eyes of the board. But this time, the air was heavier, charged with unspoken tension. Around her, whispers had already swirled for days. The board wasn't pleased. Voices within had gone too far. At the head of the table, Eleanor Briggs cleared her throat. "Ms. Johnson," she began, her tone clipped. "Let's get straight to it. Benton Global is not a charity. It is a logistics powerhouse. And while your story is inspirational, some of us feel this recent initiative has become a distraction." Mariah sat still, her face calm. She could feel her heart pounding, but her hands didn't tremble. Another board member chimed in. "Morale is one thing, but restructuring mentorship programs, diverting resources to non-executive staff, is this really the best use of company assets?" The implication was clear. She was overstepping. Mariah took a slow breath. "With respect, I'm not diverting assets. I'm uncovering them. The people you've overlooked for years, they're already here. They're already on payroll. And they have skills this company desperately needs." Eleanor's lips tightened. "Skills, perhaps, but leadership, strategy? These things require more than a few languages and a heartwarming story." Richard leaned forward, his voice firm. "Eleanor, she's not just telling stories. She's saving us money, accelerating deals, and rebuilding trust with clients we've been losing for years. If that isn't strategy, what is?" The boardroom fell into silence. Mariah seized the pause. "In Morocco, I cleared a 3-month delay. In Dubai, I prevented a campaign disaster. In Brazil, I secured a partnership we would have lost. Those weren't charity acts. They were results." She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. "If you choose to ignore talent because it doesn't come packaged in a tailored suit or Ivy League resume, that's your choice. But understand this, you're not just wasting potential, you're wasting profit." The silence grew heavier. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. When the meeting ended, Mariah walked out, her steps steady, but the weight of the confrontation pressed on her shoulders. For years she had been invisible. Now she was undeniable, but also a target. She stepped outside the glass tower and sat on the bench across the street, staring at the building. She remembered all the nights she had walked past it, carrying cleaning supplies, wondering if anyone even knew her name. Now everyone knew. Some respected her, others resented her. Her phone buzzed. It was her daughter again. "Ma, yeah. Baby, you sound tired." Mariah exhaled slowly. "I'm fine. Just a lot of voices in there." "Then remember," her daughter said gently, "the only voice that matters is the one that tells you to keep going." Mariah closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. The next morning, when she arrived at her office, something new was written on her whiteboard. "We hear you. Keep speaking." Again, no name, just solidarity. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't standing alone. In the weeks that followed, voices within blossomed. The pilot became a full program, with training workshops and mentorship pairings. Employees who had once been invisible found themselves leading small projects, contributing ideas, even joining international calls. Mariah became more than a liaison. She became a symbol. At a company-wide town hall, Richard spoke openly. "For years, we searched the world for talent, while ignoring the brilliance right in our own hallways. Ms. Johnson reminded us that greatness doesn't always look the way you expect. And if we fail to see it, the loss is ours." The room erupted in applause. But the moment that etched itself forever in Mariah's heart came later that afternoon. A young intern, his voice shaking, approached her after the meeting. "My mom's a hotel housekeeper," he whispered. "She speaks 5 languages. I used to feel embarrassed to tell people that. But seeing you here," His eyes glistened. "Now I'm proud." Mariah touched his arm gently. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. The only thing to be ashamed of is staying blind to brilliance." The words carried, rippling out like a stone dropped in water. Months later, Benton Global unveiled a new training wing. On the wall outside the main auditorium hung a plaque, simple but powerful, "The Johnson Room," in honor of voices unheard, now heard. Mariah stood before it, throat tight. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The plaque wasn't just about her. It was about every custodian, every receptionist, every cafeteria worker who had been dismissed and underestimated. And though she knew battles still lay ahead, she also knew one truth had been carved into the company forever: talent has no uniform. That evening, as she left the building, the Atlanta skyline glowing behind her, Mariah walked taller than she ever had before. For once, she wasn't invisible. She was the voice inside the walls, and no one could silence it again.